Now might be a good moment to silence or turn off your phones, turn them on to do not disturb. Voon Loong Chan learned to ride a bicycle at age 7 on a one-lane dirt road in Temoh, Malaysia, crouching under the crossbar of an adult bike, squeezed between vehicles and a barbed wire fence. The fence kept the guerrilla tigers in the jungle, mostly, but it had failed to protect the village from guerrilla soldiers. Voon Loong's family had already fled for the city of Ipoh, leaving the boy with his uncle. Welcome to the celebration of life for Voon Loong, Ricky Chan. I'm Kai, his second son, his middle child, and your MC for today. I want to warn you, over the course of my remarks, before and after the other speakers, I'm going to talk a lot about love. For years, I didn't realize that my dad was a lover. My love languages were not a natural fit with his. But now that he's gone, I can see it clearly. You'll hear from 6 other people other than me today. The first 2 are my younger sister, Sue, and my older brother, Chi. To see Sue with Dad was to see 2 people who were always and in perfect harmony with very few words. And she does for all of us what Dad did for his siblings, and then some. G inherited Dad's sportsmanship, both his physical prowess at everything he tried and his infectious play. Sue's going to come up first.
He's my lifeguard. He offered to stand closer. Wish me luck. So as my mom says, I'm a lot like my dad, usually quiet, someone who does, but doesn't necessarily say, or at least not say with as many words as she does. I didn't know if I could stand up here and talk about him today, and I still don't know if I can. But I also couldn't imagine not talking about him, celebrating his life without contributing my own words as someone who's loved him for every second of my life. Someone who's bragged about his successes even more than he did felt very wrong. So I'm going to try. I love the story of how my dad was named Voon Loong. He was given the name of Dragon with the love and hope that he would survive the adversity of being born with so little in the middle of a war without enough food. And wow, did he live up to his name. He lived and loved life so fiercely for over 83 years. And I know he would be so proud, and so I brag for him, that he made the absolute most he could of life right until the very end. I like to imagine that he crossed the finish line with his arms up and a smile on his face. Some of you may remember him for his dedication and his work ethic as a scientist, his long hours in the lab or at his desk held high with his journals and papers. Or you may know him for his dedication of sport, his long hours at the squash court or on his bike, or more recently on the pickleball court. Usually with a smile and a tip for his companions. Or you may know him for his love of food, his dedication for cutting his mangoes and pineapples to perfection with the steadiest hands and pieces to share with everyone. When I think of my dad, I remember the person who quietly waited for me, no matter how slow I was, the person who spent hours driving me to my sports without ever a complaint or a sign that it was a task, the person who invited everyone to dinner, the person who called me wherever he was in the world and always asked about the people I love. My dad dying so suddenly and unexpectedly broke my heart. Tony's words from that day stick with me. We had to call our kids from Europe to let them know their grandpa had died. And after sharing some tears, he said, I know he was the best. And for me, he really was. And I'm so grateful for all of you who made it here today to celebrate his life and to support us through his loss. I hope for me, celebrating his life never ends. Every time we invite someone to dinner, and especially if we manage to get the bill, or when we support someone when they really need it, or enjoy a long bike ride, especially if it's hilly, or hike up to a beautiful view, or hit a ball with a racket or a paddle, or call someone we love, I'm going to count that as celebrating his life. So many of you have told me how my dad inspired you. Thank you for sharing that. And may he continue to inspire you to live your best life right until the end.
Hi, I'm Chi, I'm the eldest son. My mother says I'm the joker of the family. Perhaps me trying to live up to my father's outstanding legacy. It's interesting, his expectations. He expected a lot, but never forced you. I think as Sue described his name, Voon Loong, he was the dragon. He was extremely fierce. Fierce in his anger, fierce in his competitive spirit, and fierce in his love. Quietly fierce, but absolutely fierce. I think it's probably said in every one of these that I'm so thankful for each and every one of you who came. And we really appreciate you coming. I didn't want to stand up here and talk about myself, but I think it's impossible to accurately describe him without talking about his family. So you would think he was born a traditional Chinese man, but he married and loved for his whole life a brilliant, headstrong, and impulsive woman from a different culture. And they were talented parents. I told them when we were younger that they were lucky they didn't have any troublesome teenagers, but that probably wasn't luck. My brother might have been a challenging child, but he is an amazing, wonderful man. He's kind. My sister was never a troublesome child, but is the amazing beating heart of our family, and kind doesn't begin to describe her. Then they and we married wonderful people that have only contributed to our family. And my father and I can't say enough about his grandchildren. There are 7 young, amazing young people that I would be proud and absolutely ridiculous not to choose in any sporting event, in any art competition, in anything. They're amazing, and I love you all. Most of all, I think my father taught me about cutting fruit. My sister's already talked about that, and perhaps you've seen pictures. I saw a picture of my father cutting his mango. So dinners, as my sister described, were a large sort of collegial affair. People were brought in from all over. They were my friends, they were Sue's friends, they were relative strangers. And dinner was followed by dessert and fruit, which was a ritual in itself. If you had 1 pie, 2 apples, an orange, and a mango, the pie and 9 people, the pie was cut into exactly 9 pieces, which was usually the job of the most recent guest. We would put you on stage. The apples were cut so that there was at least 9 pieces, the oranges segmented so that everybody had, and the mango was an art. He wanted to be a surgeon when he was younger, and he would peel using a paring knife the mango all the way around in one continuous long strip, and then slice off the fresh fruit in scallops so that the fibers in a mango you wouldn't taste. To him, this was art and this was love. Cutting the fruit is showing that we share, I love you, and we do this together. Some families share communion, a Shabbat dinner, get together to make offerings at a temple. But we, as most of you are probably aware, are a secular family and a scientific one. So our dinners were full of vigorous debate, fresh fruit, and a lot of love. I admit I've been selfish and have pulled an apple off the shelf and eaten it by myself. But when I do, I think I let my father down. My father once spent 3 days searching Toronto fruit markets for just the right mangoes to buy for a lab party for his students that we were inviting over. That same week, in one afternoon, he decided and purchased the new car, which was a Volvo. Obviously, one was more important than the other. Another story, my father sat me down, being at university here reminds me, in grade 9, I had some 70s on my report card, and he sat me down seriously and said, if you don't shape up, you're going to end up at Brock. And that was the worst that he could imagine for me. Not that I wouldn't graduate high school it was that I wouldn't get to a good university. And naturally, all of his children graduated undergrad at U of T, which he was extremely proud of. I tell my stories not to try and teach you who my father is. If you're here, you likely knew him, and you knew him. He was never not himself. And I hope, like me, you're a better person for having had him in your life. I was extremely lucky to have had him for my entire 53 years. So on behalf of me and my family, welcome and thank you.
Cutting fruit was central for all of us. I was 10 when Dad first let me cut a mango. We were at his office, not far from here, in the Fitzgerald building basement. He found a mango that he had forgotten. It was soggy as anything. It was like soup in a bag. And all he had was a plastic knife that was about this long with serrated edges. And he looked at it and he was like, how about you try it? So I took the mango. I was going to take any chance I could get. Took the mango in my left hand, found the stem, had to saw vigorously to get through it at all. I managed to get this like wobbly single strand. My dad used to like to hang up the whole thing as one, and then scalloped it off as best I could while the juice was running down my arm to my elbow. But I did it. And he looked over and he was like, not bad. And after that, he let me cut fruit. It wasn't the first or last time that he extended trust, so I could learn. I totaled the family car. And that week, he and my mom pushed me to get back in and drive again. Cutting and serving fruit isn't just about feeding people. It's an act of unconditional love for plants and for Dad. A plant is nourishing animals whose ancestors carried their ancestors as seeds. By cutting fruit in beautiful pieces and serving them equally, Dad told people they mattered. One thing about having a highly accomplished father or grandfather is that not everyone felt equally loved all the time. With the passage of time, I've become convinced that this was more about us than him. He believed in all of us fiercely and wanted us to follow our passions and fulfill our potential. He kept learning new love languages, though. How many 80-year-old men learn to use the heart emoji and use it liberally? The heart and soul of Dad's work was, as a professor at U of T, was his lab group. Water balloons, egg tosses, and rockets at Center Island fused them in my mind, young mind, as a group of smart, fun people who enjoyed being together. They were invited into our family and they treated the three of us like we mattered. One of the people that Dad touched, of all the people that Dad touched, no one is better poised to represent his academic life than David Ng, Director of Genetic Access Tools and Associate Research Scientist at Columbia's Zuckerman Institute.
Thank you, Kai, for the kind words. Friends and colleagues, I'm honored to share with you some of my experiences with my mentor and friend, Ricky. Our paths first crossed when I was back in high school. My grade 12 bio class had just completed a unit on recombinant DNA technology when it came across a posting from Professor V.L. Chan. Thank you. He had a spot available for a high school intern to help clone genes from an organism called Campylobacter jejuni. I jumped at the opportunity, not knowing that this would plant the seed for a lifelong friendship. My first meeting with Professor Chan went something like this. In the basement of the Fitzgerald building, I entered room 68. Inside his lab, shelves full of chemicals, a fume hood, lab benches, a mini autoclave, electrophoresis tanks, and a very large water jug. At the back of the room was his office. When I entered, he greeted me from his desk. The office was crammed full of books, a Mac computer, sort of like a typical office, but a few things really stood out for me. One was a box with a dozen mangoes. Two, there's also a carton of Kung Fu instant noodles. And perhaps unintentional, but prominently displayed on his chair was a weathered squash racket. He was very mild-mannered and described various projects in his lab, which included building a physical map of the C. jejuni genome, cloning conserved genes for using them as genetic markers, and developing diagnostic assays to distinguish these pathogens. I mostly listened and asked a few technical questions about DNA cloning, and then I asked about the squash racket. It looked like it had been through a battlefield. Its grip tape all worn out, scuff marks along the frame, and rubber streaks smeared on the strings. His face instantly lit up. His posture straightened as if cued by a magic word. He said he enjoyed playing squash and that he had just come back from the AC, playing against the University of Toronto varsity squash players, and that he had soundly defeated them and was happy that they were only able to score 1 or 2 points. At the time, I had no idea what the scoring system was, so I just nodded along. He then went on to say that he really enjoyed playing badminton, riding his bike everywhere, and then he asked if I played squash. I didn't, but I did track. He then started describing one of his sons around my age who also did track and had that summer worked in a game booth at the CNE. In my mind, I chuckled because I too had just worked at the CNE in a game booth with someone who also did track. So I asked, "Is your son Kai?" His face changed to a look of bewilderment. I don't know whether that was what clinched the interview, but I joined the lab the following week and started working with a talented PhD student, Eric Haney, who sadly departed this world too early. Eric, along with Hermine, I worked together to clone several genes from the arginine biosynthetic pathway by complementation using various E. coli mutants. Weekly lab meetings were quite technical, with Professor Chan leading the troubleshooting discussion, asking detailed questions like, how many microliters did you use? How long was your incubation time? And did you try this method? So he was very deeply immersed in experiments in his lab. A few months in, I began to address him as Dr. Chan, which was just easier to say. He called me into his office one day to ask for help to troubleshoot a computer problem. When that was resolved, he told me he was assigning me a lab chore. I was actually quite excited then because I thought it meant that I'd become a dependable member of the lab. My job was to fill this enormous water jug. It was really large. It held probably about 50 liters. And my first time around, I measured that the flow rate of the molecule system was about 1 liter per minute. So I set a timer for 45 minutes. And this was just before student seminars. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be efficient. I'm going to come down in between speakers and stop the water. So after the second speaker had finished presenting and started taking questions, I realized I'd missed my timer. I shot up from my seat, yelled an explicit, and bolted out of the seminar room. I ran downstairs, barged into the lab, and saw that there was this huge flood all over the floor. And the water's seeping into Dr. Chan's office. I grabbed anything that could soak up water, paper towels, bench soap, my lab coat, and then eventually all lab coats. And I managed to contain the flood. After the seminar was finished, Dr. Chan came into the room. He didn't say anything. He just looked around, saw a pile of wet and soaking lab coats, and then grinned. And then he just said, wow, the lab floor is really clean. And then he just went into his lab, into his office. I later learned that I had been taken off the water jug duty and reassigned the task to filling pipette tip boxes, which for those in the lab is one of the most menial tasks. So I somehow survived that incident and continued working in Dr. Chan's lab throughout my entire undergrad. By then, he asked me to just call him Ricky, but perhaps out of habit or out of respect, I continued calling him Dr. Chan. Until one day, I needed to ask him a question about an abstract we were submitting for an ASM meeting. I called him at home, and Kai actually picked up. And I asked, may I please speak to Dr. Chan? And there was a pause on the phone. And Kai responded, which one? From that, I learned that Penny was also holding a doctorate degree. And from there, it became Ricky. Towards the end of my undergrad year, Ricky organized a lab weekend retreat to a cottage. The lab talked about science, but mostly enjoyed the weekend campfire and barbecue. There was a pond, and Ricky asked me if I'd want to join him out on a canoe. I told him I was a novice, but he insisted that I try. So here we are in a canoe on a pond, complete novice, and I eventually got the hang of paddling. As we were turning back towards the shore, I think I started wobbling a bit, and he told me to keep my center of gravity low. What do? I look back, and suddenly we were both standing in water. He had told me this was the first time he had ever tipped in a canoe. So I saw him, he was wearing a pouch, and I was actually quite worried that I'd destroyed his phone, but he said not to worry, that he had a sense that something like that would happen, and he had left his phone on shore. Looking back, I realize I've called Ricky by many names. Each could represent different phases of our developing friendship. First, it was Professor Chan, who gave me the opportunity in his lab to learn about science. Later, it was Dr. Chan, who taught me a tremendous amount about recombinant DNA techniques and insisted that I learn things from first principle to really understand the system that I'm working in. I still use those principles today, whether I'm training other students or developing genetic tools to interrogate complex cell types in the brain. Then it was Ricky, friend and colleague, someone who was calm and reserved, but underneath had a deep sense of competitiveness and always on the lookout for someone to play ball with. This competitive, at least in my experience, was never egotistic. Rather, he had channeled this inner drive as a challenge to improve himself, to be the best version of yourself, whether it was in science or life. Whether you call him Voon Loong, Professor Chan, Dr. Chan, Grandpa, Uncle, Dad, or Ricky, we know him as a wonderful colleague, dear friend, loving parent. I know he's incredibly proud of his family. Ricky, I'm honored to have worked with you, and I humbly say thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for coming all the way from New York and for those words. One of the life lessons that Dad was most firm on was to stay connected to teachers, professors, and mentors. He said, "You never know when they might be able to help you." It never felt like the real reason. Years later, I realized that he was also speaking as a mentor. He wanted people to stay connected so that he could keep helping them. Over the years, he told us about friends from work or sports and how they were doing. For a good number of them, their own families barely visited, but he did. He was proudly a middle sibling in a big family of 6 boys and 6 girls. He loved them and their spouses and their children and called them often and spent months of every year in Malaysia after he retired. Today, we are missing our beloved aunts and uncles, Yao Che, Anna, Irene, Alfred, Vun Chung, Sao Lin, Sao Ching, and Same. Remember his mother's brother who took him in at age 7? Dad did. We hosted cousin after cousin in our house for months, or even 4 or 5 years of their schooling. Yongming, Susie, Jerome, and Jiling. In the process, they became part of the family. Jiling has come from Hong Kong to say a few words.
Thank you, Kai. Yeah, I gotta read from the script. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jiling. Together with my wife and 2 boys, we arrived last night from Hong Kong. My uncle Voon Loong, is the older brother of my mom, Sao Ching, who is the 11th of their family of 12. When I was 16, my parents, who have always been my greatest supporters, offered me the opportunity to study abroad. And my mom suggested Canada. She knew I would never be alone there because her brother, my uncle Voon Loong, Auntie Penny and the family was in the city. That was all the reassurance she needed, and I grabbed it. Uncle Voon Loong opened his home to me without hesitation. But I was not the only one, like Kai just mentioned. Over the years, he had welcomed 3 of my other older cousins, Yongming, Susie was Irene's daughter, Jerome was Anna's son. We all came at different times, from different paths, and we all stayed at his home. He welcomed each of us into his life, and in doing so, he changed the course of ours. I would assume if the whole village would have come, he would have put us all in the same home. So all three of us graduated, or all four of us graduated and went back to be successful in our own ways. Okay, here comes the hard part, okay? So I also would like to speak on behalf of Uncle Voon Loong's sisters and brothers in Malaysia. They are unable to be here, and all of them remain deeply shaken and grieving his sudden passing. Through our conversation, or my conversation with them the past few days and weeks, they have shared their deep grief and fond memories, and I'm honored to carry their words to you. Though thousands of miles separated him from our Malaysian hometown, distance never dimmed his love for our family. He was the glue that held us together. He celebrated every joy sincerely and comforted us through every hardship. For all of us younger generations, he was a quiet one. They said, my uncle wasn't a man of many words, but he was a good role model, positive, gentle, and steady. This is specifically from Auntie Saulin, who carries the loss and the weight of the whole family's heartache. Just weeks, like literally 2 weeks or so before losing, after losing her own husband, who had been blind for like 20 over years and endured multiple strokes and recoveries, she now faces the absence of a very close brother. And through those very difficult years, Uncle Voon Loong, my uncle, was always there, a steady pillar of support for both of them, because it was just very difficult for both of them. He never made a show of it, he simply showed up. He was the same quiet, steadfast presence whenever he and Auntie Penny visited Malaysia. Even though he had many options, he always chose to stay at Auntie Saulin's home, calling it his second home. It was his way of standing beside her. My uncle remained humble, grounded, and genuinely kind. He kept regular, warm phone calls with his brothers and sisters, chatting about daily life and his favorite pickleball games. Through every season of life, he and Auntie Penny stood by our family, offering endless love and support. My uncle leaves behind a quiet, beautiful legacy, a lovely devotion to family, a generous kindness to others, and a life filled with passion, achievements, and warmth. He has touched all our lives deeply, and we will cherish his memory forever. And on behalf of the entire family in Malaysia, we send our deepest condolences, our sincere love, and warmest wishes to Auntie Penny, Ji, Kai, Sue, and every member of the family. Finally, I would also like to thank Kai for giving me this opportunity to speak. It's an honor to stand before all of you, friends and family who love my uncle, and those who have traveled here to be with us. Your presence means more than words can say. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Given. It was with our Malaysian family that I first felt Dad's broader weaving of relationships. It was easy to take for granted our little family of 5 on this continent, where so all of our family was overseas pretty much. In Malaysia, the bonds that Dad had forged extended to include us too. Countless relatives and friends took us in and showered us with food and love. My daughters were floored by this too, just 2 years ago when Dad, Mom, and I finally took them to Malaysia and Singapore. Jiling's family, my Auntie Sao Ching and Uncle Yo, were our superlative hosts. We will always be grateful for that Dad's family made us their family too. I wrote the Lives Lived article that I quoted from in the Globe and Mail as a gift to my dad. I realized that after 50 years, I had never really got him. I wanted to honor all that he had given me, some of which I hadn't properly appreciated while he was alive. The author guidelines asked for foibles and flaws, but it felt like betrayal. The editor pushed it again. No one is perfect, she said. Tell me one thing that made you crazy. His bragging made me crazy, but I sweated it. In the still of the night, I finally realized I could help people understand and appreciate how that 7-year-old made his way in the world, how he sought to be seen. I wrote, that said, he liked to tell people how often he won. Surely they wanted to know? Let's face it, he had a lot to brag about. Here's John Cameron, a good friend from pickleball and founder of the Etobicoke Pickleball Association.
Oh, I have to look at myself? That won't exactly. Okay, hello, everybody. I'm honored to be able to speak on behalf of our pickleball community. I'm aware that he's played in many places in Toronto, the GTA, around the world, in Malaysia and Australia. My first introduction to Ricky was through an email. He wanted to join our Humber Valley pickleball tournament, even though it was already full. He kept emailing and emailing. So finally I said, all right, come as a backup sub. And sure enough, he rode his bike all the way up to Humber Valley. Didn't have a chair, so he sat on the ground and quietly watching every point like it really mattered. Then partway through the day, one of the players had to leave. I turned to Ricky and asked, are you ready to play? He didn't hesitate. He jumped up, warmed up quickly into the semifinal and helped his team advance to the final. They ended up winning silver. And yes, he does like to brag. He's won lots of medals. In that moment, it was obvious this guy wasn't just a sub. Ricky was going to be part of our advanced group from then on, 5 days a week. Moments like that were just the beginning of what Ricky brought to our courts, and I'm not alone in feeling that way. Many players shared heartfelt messages. I'd like to read a few. Truly a gentleman and a scholar, a tremendous sportsman and athlete, a great guy and competitor. We had many interesting conversations, and I will miss his generous and kind way. An amazing person, interacted with everyone he met, was willing to play with anyone, no matter what their skill level. He lived life to the fullest with Penny. I always admired his crafty play, his quiet demeanor, and gentlemanly manner. He accomplished a lot on the court and in his professional life. An excellent opponent on the court, sharing great conversations on the bench. Our pickleball community has lost an amazing member. So a few years ago, I had a tennis elbow, or pickleball elbow, I like to call it. And I was playing left-handed. Let's see if I can get this in. But he early on, he asked me to step outside the gym. And he brought out this box. You guys are familiar? Like, what's going on here? So he sat me down, he started rubbing it on my arm. And sure enough, sorry, I lost my place here. And he gave it to me. So it's such a simple gesture, but it meant a lot to me. He generally wanted to help me heal. Just then Sylvia walked by and said, ancient Chinese secret. So Ricky laughed and told me he used it on plenty of U of T athletes as well, on his son's teams. I keep this little container in my bathroom for good luck, and now it reminds me of Ricky. A few more messages from our community. We really can't believe it. Shocking. Very sad for us to lose such a great person. Doesn't seem possible. I played with him last Monday and no longer is here to be the quiet, gentle presence, and also played so well. A true gentleman on and off the court. Shock took my breath away. We met the first year he started playing pickleball at the old Mary McCormick Center and kept in contact at EPA events. Whether you played with or against him, he was a true sportsman. He was an impressive, fine man. In so many ways, I will always remember him with admiration and affection. Sorry, it's longer than 3 minutes. Ricky also had this beautiful routine with Penny. He'd bike over to Valleyfield, which is incredible to bike from downtown to Valleyfield Park and then play for 3 hours. The guy was just incredible. Penny would arrive too, always near the end with Cobb's bread pizza for the two of them to enjoy. They sit together, share their meal, and you can see how much they love being in each other's company. More thoughts from the community. Devastating news. He was supposed to live forever. The fittest guy I've ever met. Simply a fine man. Kind, gentle, a very crafty and talented competitor who was fun to play with and against. A real inspiration to all of us. Such a competitor on the court. And off the court, he was a gentleman, soft-spoken, never had a bad thing to say about anybody. He was so kind, soft-spoken, you can see some familiar lines here, and quietly confident. A true competitor with exceptional sportsmanship and integrity. He brought intelligence, hard work, and passion to everything he did, not just on the court, but in life. Truly inspiring. I was just amazed how fit, how healthy, and strong he was. What a competitor. He never complained. It was a real inspiration for me and others. So the Friday before we lost Ricky is the day I think about often. He played with us at the Etobicoke Olympian. And normally he'd sit at one end of the bench and I'd sit at the other. But that day he walked over and sat right where I usually sit. So close that we ended up sharing the same chair that day. It felt randomly intentional, like he wanted to be right there with me. A little later, Brenda asked if he'd seen all of the wonderful Facebook posts about him winning multiple medals at the US Open. He sat down with her, looked at all the comments, smiling as he scrolled. He was so happy, and that's how I remember him. Through his kindness, his determination, and the joy he brought to every court he stepped on, he became part of the fabric of our community. Ricky, we are lucky to know you and lucky to call you our friend. You are missed and will always be remembered.
Hands up if my dad rubbed Zhang Shui on you too. Dad was an exceptional athlete because he worked at it, on and off the court. For squash and pickleball, he taught himself by studying how great players played the game. And as you've heard, he went on to win multiple medals at the World Squash Masters Championships and the US Open Pickleball Championships. Every morning, he went through a routine of push-ups and abdominal exercises. And this last winter, after a morning of go-kart racing, my mom and I were walking on a parking lot with Dad. I noticed a little patch of ice and I reached over to try to steady him, but I was too late. His feet slipped out, whoosh, he went down. But he tucked himself like hollow body, refrained from putting his hands down and breaking his wrist, kept his head from whipping back and hitting the concrete. And as I helped him up, I thought, here's an 80-year-old who's ready for the next decade or more. And 4 months later, he was gone. Dad's greatest gift to me was the people. Not only the people that he loved first, but the ones that he helped to bring into my life. And the ones that he taught me how to love. He taught me to parlay sports into friendship and pushed me to attend UTS, where I made lifelong friends. It all started with his partnership with Mom, the yin to his yang, the muse, Sherpa, and concierge for his adventures, and his chief of staff and head cheerleader for every goal, dream, or pursuit. The two of them gave me the best brother and sister that I ever could have asked for in Jean and Sue. They weaved in my sister-in-law Noreen and my brother-in-law Tony. And together, they bought my nephews and nieces, Keegan, Amara, Brayden, Teague, Senna. My wife, Yuba, and I learned from their example to raise Taya and Tiva. And this t-shirt sporting Chan Clan plays together and supports each other. They are true fruit sharers. Here's Dad's partner and everything, Penny.
Wow, I'm not quite sure where to start. Thank you all so much for coming. It's been an absolute treat to see so many friends, family, everybody who's really his life is touched. And thank you so much for coming here. And it gives me a great deal of pleasure. It makes me very proud. It makes me very humble. It makes me very happy. It makes me very sad. And I'm afraid you might get a mixture of all of it. Yes, you heard and see all his accomplishments, his medals. We didn't probably do justice to his academic career. The science that he did was really top notch. He worked sabbatical with Michael Smith as a partner within his lab, and he was an all-rounder, but he was also, although he was in some ways a leader, but he was very much a team player. He believed that every member, every friend, everybody had a role to play, and that was the way he treated the family. Everybody was important, and the people, his friends, were all very important. His achievements, though, they didn't all come totally naturally, and I think people have alluded to the fact that, he was a very hard worker. I'll go back, and I've got a lot of years to go back, but I want to start when I first met him was in high school. I was in a not very good school. The attrition rate getting to Form 6 was the last year in high school. We had an attrition rate of 90%. So our school sort of opened up in order to keep a Form 6 to new Asian students, because we didn't have enough locals in the area really to have a Form 6 class. And so for a couple of years, we'd been getting a few Asian students into it. And about a week after the first week of our Form 6, I was in science class, and a new guy was being introduced, a new Asian student. And I have to say, I'm 16 years old. I look, hey, he's not bad looking. He's got kind of a pleasant expression on his face. And of course, we were in a science class, which was 22 boys and 2 girls. So it was sort of a very unbalanced class. Anyway, we worked together. We were as a group, but he excelled in his sports. He very quickly became the captain of the basketball team. He was winning swimming, diving events. He was having lots of fun. It's Australia, and we're very competitive, very sports-minded. So the guy's a hero straight off. This is terrific. After about 6 months, I guess, we started dating. The group that we hung out with was a bit smaller. But came the end of the year, and you've got to remember that he was sent to Australia as a student. Work hard, do a good job, don't come back with a white wife, was what his mother said to him at the... Anyway, he was having to fast track because he didn't have much money. We had to get through his studies. They'd scrimped and saved. And in those days, we had one external exam for the whole Form 6 for the whole state, and everybody did the same exam, and the results were published in the newspaper. So you didn't know, you just sat and read the newspaper when it came out. And he happened to be visiting me that day, and the results came out, and he had only 3 credits. He needed 4 to get into university, and he was just devastated. I never saw, I think, only 2 or 3 times in our 65 years did I see him cry. He was just so forlorn. I've let my family down. They've scrimped and saved and done this for me, and I've let them down. What am I going to do? I'm going to have to go home. And he used the words, I'm going to have to pull a rickshaw. And that's what you did if you didn't have, that's the way he felt, an education. He'd come from a poor family. And, it was a really, really tough time. And what did he do? Recovered, took some deep breaths. He went out and got a job in a fish shop for the summer. We earned a bit of money, and he went back and repeated the year, and he repeated it, yes, as a sports hero, but he also repeated it as a student. And he worked really hard. He was dedicated and devoted to his work. He had to do it. Her family had given up so much. He was the choice for that education. And that's the sort of thing that drove him. He had that absolute drive, but it was very much for the family. And that's why even, I mean, he got into graduate school when we came to Canada. Yeah, we did get married after university, and we could afford to come to Canada to do graduate work. And all the time we were only on scholarships, and he would send money back to the family in Malaysia to help support the rest of the family. It had come upon hard times. And obviously his work paid off. He did really well. We went back to Malaysia, and when we both had PhDs at that time, we taught in the University of Malaysia. Well, it was Malaya at that time. And the opportunities for the children was not so good. Our life was wonderful. We had a great life in Malaysia. We had a lovely family. We had 2 of the boys were born in Malaysia. But the political situation, the prejudices, we were acutely aware of mixed race. I have to say, though, the family, after I was there for a while, they accepted me so totally and completely. I was a full-fledged member of the family, and it was a wonderful feeling to be the team. And his whole life has sort of been built around team spirit. When he was captain of the basketball team, it was each person had a position, each person had a talent, and you bring it together, you can get the most out of people. And to me, that's what all his friends, it's all been a team to build the life that he has built, our family. It's been a sheer delight to share it. I mean, clearly it was my life for a long time, and it's now half gone. But the family's morphed. The family has grown, got new blood into the family, and it's still the lovely team that can still go on. And I just wish that all of you, whatever contribution and happiness he brought to your life, I hope that that will stay on always and do you as well in your lives as it has for us. And I had a whole lot of other things I did want to say, but I think Kai's doing a time clock on me here, so I guess. But the one thing I do want to say, I should have thought and researched, well, I knew his life, as an academic, but his research, as I say, I was very worried when he was retiring because he'd put his life into his research. What's he going to find as the next challenge? It was always a challenge. He didn't like walking unless it was a mountain, that you were conquering the mountain. It was always, he would lead the pack, so to speak. When he cycled, he had to be in the lead. And I have to say this continued. And I'm going to use a little anecdote here. I didn't mean to, but with Sue and her family, we went down the Grand Canyon, hiked down, camped down there. We had a lovely time. The children were really quite young. I can't remember, but I could see that one of Sue's children, who will remain anonymous, was striving to get up out of the canyon ahead of everyone else. And Ricky started picking up his pace. I mean, the kid's this big, for goodness sake. And he's wanting to he had to get up to the top before. I said, come on, the guy's what, 8 years old, was he? I can't remember. But he always had to compete. But that was the amazing thing. As the family evolved, it didn't become you had to win. You had to do the best that you can at what gives you pleasure in life. And that was the lesson that evolved out of a really tough struggle that he had at the beginning. And then he started to do the things, and we were going to cycle around the world. That was our retirement plan. But when we got to the Nullarbor plain across the Australian desert, he said, no way. So we just do shorter trips and get more fun out of it. So that's the man I hope that you will always remember, one who, and we've all been lucky to have known him, and I hope that his spirit lives on with you all throughout your lives, and that you can be as lucky as we are as a family. Thank you all so much for coming.
I was just checking my notes, not checking the time. Thank you, Mom, and thank you all very much for coming. Dad made friends with my friends and with their parents. He bonded with our parents-in-law. He spent a lifetime weaving people together. Looking around this room and on video, I think many of you have chosen to keep weaving with us. You're fruit sharers too. For Dad, one final thought. We studied how you played this game. Thank you.